Good afternoon to you. Mark Sudduth, HurricaneTrack.com, here with your hurricane outlook and discussion for July 30th, 2015. Let's start off today looking at the climatology chart, kind of remind you of where we are and where we are headed in a normal season. And this is probably not going to be a normal season, meaning that it'll be below normal activity. But even that being the case, we still have to think of climatology as sort of a background volume control, if you will, and it helps us to understand why certain things aren't going to develop, maybe won't develop, etc. and so forth. And if we look at this, you can see we're right here, very close to the August 1st time frame, and up to now activity is generally very flat. It's not until after the 1st of August and really after August 20th that things normally really start to ramp up overall. Now certainly, we're on the upside of the mountain here, headed up, but we're still very low in terms of overall activity. And so this helps us to understand that climatologically speaking, as I'll show you in the presentation here coming forward, that we're not supposed to have a lot of activity this time of year, despite having a couple of areas of interest. Hopefully that helps explain that sometimes your climatological background is an inhibiting factor as well. In other words, if we had something out there in December, you can see way over here on the right hand side of the chart, you virtually have no activity in December. There's a little bit over the past 100+ years, but you're not supposed to normally. And so if you were to have something out there in December, you'd say, yeah, it's probably not going to do much. But here at the 1st of August, there's a little bit more chance, but even such, it's not that much, maybe 20%, since we're talking about a 100-year time frame, and that's about what we're seeing. So, this helps us to understand. Now, if we were sitting here at the peak of the season in September, we would just about expect something to develop that has the look of what we're going to talk about in just a moment. So all that being said, this is what we have, a couple of yellow areas to look at off the southeast coast, another one here just southwest of the Cape Verde Islands, and if we mouse over both of these, the first one, 10% chance of development. This is an area off the Carolinas, and if we look at the satellite map, you can see them positioned here, one way out on the eastern Atlantic, the other here in the western Atlantic. So let's take a look at each via satellite, and this is a good one here, the east coast of the U.S., visible satellite shot as the sun comes up. There's definitely a low-level center sitting in here over the very, very warm water of the Gulf Stream here in the Atlantic, but strong northerly and northeast winds coming down across this system, clearly pushing the thunderstorms away from any low-level circulation that is trying to develop. Nevertheless, you get some cloud cover coming in here across parts of the Outer Banks and extreme southeast North Carolina. This will increase the swells off the coast by just a little bit, so surfers, you might have a little bit better wave setup coming up in the next few days as this system slowly meanders and moves up around kind of like this over the next few days, with maybe a slight increase in its organization, but I don't think it's going to become a tropical storm. It may look a little bit more organized on satellite, and the Hurricane Center might increase the probabilities a little bit, but the shear is just too strong for this to develop much over the next few days. Our next system is way out here in the eastern Atlantic off the west coast of Africa right here. There it is, 94L. It's pretty well organized for this time of year. Again, going back to climatology, the reason that we are still flat here at around 20% is, climatologically speaking, the pot is not ready to boil just yet. And that really has to do with this area out in here. The main development region isn't quite ready just yet. Water temperatures are still warming. The atmosphere still has a lot of dry air that comes off of Africa to deal with, and things are still generally stable. But down at these lower latitudes here, you do have the occasional tropical wave that'll come off and look rather interesting, and this is one of them, 94L. However, as it moves westward over time, more than likely it's going to start to fizzle as it gets into a little bit cooler sea surface temperature pattern in this area and a more stable air mass, plus the upper level winds are probably going to come out of the west and west-southwest and shear it apart. But there are other impulses that are trying to come off over the next several days, and each one of these, as I mentioned yesterday, is kind of like an arrow that's being fired, and maybe one of them is eventually going to hit its target, whatever that means. It doesn't necessarily mean it hits the U.S., but possibly one of these can come across and affect the islands over here. You just never know. The point is, the tropical waves are robust, and they are there, traveling across the Atlantic, and it's just a matter of time if we have enough of them. Since we do have fairly warm water sitting in this region, I don't know, one or two might get through, especially later in August and into September. I found this to be an interesting map, and this, again, really helps to understand how climatology factors in as a background, like I said, volume control, if you will, and then you look at your current conditions. This is a probability of tropical cyclone formation over the next 5 to 10 days based on last night's model run of the GFS and its ensemble members. And over the next 10 days, very little activity seen off the southeast coast or the Gulf. Some here off the northwest coast of Colombia, tucked away in the southwest Caribbean. But even this corresponds to only 20 to 30%. And this is, I think, 20 different runs of the GFS, and how many of them produce a tropical cyclone. And so you get this interesting look out in the deep tropics here, less than 20% overall. And that favors in very nicely with climatology, that we normally don't expect much to happen, maybe 2 times out of 10, and we're just not seeing those probabilities go up very much right now. If water temperatures out this way were running above normal and pressures were below normal, and we didn't have this big El Nino here in the Pacific, then these numbers out here would be a lot higher. This is just a really neat way to visualize the probability over the next 10 days. And as you can see, everything is on the left-hand side of the scale here, and so we really don't have much to worry about over the next 10 days or so. And then the other way to look at it is the MJO, or the Madden-Julian Oscillation, also not very favorable for development anywhere around the globe, although we do have a couple of features, and we'll look at one of those in more detail in just a minute. It doesn't mean that there's nothing globally, but it doesn't really help things when you have an MJO that is going into the null phase here. Basically, this means that we don't have any large-scale, widespread areas of upward motion in the atmosphere anywhere around the globe, but the Euro trying to maybe amplify it towards phases 5 and 4 over the next few weeks. We'll see. Once we get into mid-August and beyond, the MJO helps, but then climatology starts to kick in, and it begins to take over just by default. So it's interesting how these things kind of vacillate back and forth between early in the season, your MJO really helps out. Later in the season, climatology itself takes over, and you're supposed to have development when conditions become favorable, and we'll see, right? But in a non-active MJO period, you can still have systems develop, like here in the Pacific. We have Tropical Storm Guillermo, and it is forecast to become a hurricane over the very warm waters of the eastern Pacific, and then more than likely weaken. Even though water temperatures around Hawaii over here are above normal, the air mass in this region is still fairly stable, more stable than way down here in the deep tropics where Guillermo has formed. This will be something to watch. Very difficult to hit Hawaii with a hurricane from the southeast. I don't think it's ever happened in at least the last 50 years. Not to say it won't happen, but it's very hard to do. Typically, you need to have a low latitude system coming around and then curving across the Hawaiian Islands like Aniki did back in 1992, I think it was. So we'll watch Guillermo and see what happens with that. But no worries, and nothing off the Pacific coast of Mexico to worry about right now. The MJO just not favorable to produce widespread development around the globe at the moment. So a few random areas to watch, otherwise nice and quiet. All right, well, that's it from me for today. Have a good rest of your Thursday afternoon. Again, I'm Mark Sudduth for HurricaneTrack.com. Thanks for tuning in. I'll have another video post for you tomorrow.